It's all yet to me, right? But see, this is the thing. In time itself has to by itself, has to stand its true identity of itself that is created through its imagination of its system. So it knows exactly when to sit down, when to drink, when to watch TV. It's already set. So the body doesn't need to figure that out. What the body has to figure out is it's not in a story that implicates everything you've already done to its equation. Okay, so it can look at the chair, but it doesn't have to sit in a chair. Okay, but you're in a story, you have no choice because that's how the mind sets you up in a three-dimensional system of the story itself. So you have to sit in a chair because the mind is projecting you to sit in that chair. And the chair that you're seeing is nothing but its solidarity. There's no consolidation there because that's all you know. So you have to sit in that chair because the mind's telling you so. Right? So if I'm looking at that chair, I don't need to sit in that chair. That means I have freedom and sovereignty to sit in that chair or do whatever I want because I'm already knowing who I am. I don't need to identify myself because I know how to operate myself, which is nothing of story, but stories I go through. So that's just a little point of view, guys, to understand that how this works in your system through operations. Knowing how to come into the objective and how you see the narrations of you through story itself. Now, just giving you a little example with the chair, how it all works, how the mind works with its systems of operation. And once it understands it's just identities, it realizes it can do whatever it wants. It doesn't need to listen to itself anymore because it knows its system of operation. It doesn't need to confuse its alignment to what it is in settings, how it adapts to this or how it adapts to this, or how it sees this and perceptive, and how it communicates to this level and how it talks to this person, how that person talks to that person. It doesn't need to identify its system because it knows what it is of its own system. It's its own operation of its imagination. So travels in communication lines of grounds, sets set lines of sequence, platitude and operation lines of travel communication. Okay? Knowing exactly what you're identifying is you know exactly what the chair is because it's at your frequency. There's the balance. There's the confirmation. There's the integration. There's the interface. All right. So I just want to give you guys a little bit an example of how powerful it is, how you see a chair. Right? So the body doesn't know if there is a chair there because it doesn't see itself as an actual projection. But the body sees what the mind implanted inside its system, which is human implantation. So it can't identify its system, so it has to sit in that chair. And all the body sees is a solidarity of its system. No, it's in a 3-dimension, which is locked in the mind itself. All right, let's get in lines of screens. You have your test tomorrow, lines of rotation. We have our DQs, process lines of negation, lines of flux. So we're starting with triangulation lines of box, or one setting, one sequence. Travels 3 centers of travel, right? Direct ground centers, operation lines of platforms over lines of pi. Process course centers and communication lines of grounds. Set course centers, time centers, fly outward lines of chartways, box frame, teller line centers, directing ground centers of box frame. Set operation lines of sequence platform. Process lines of grounds, operation lines and solar generation lines, screen adaptations, and 144 flux of travel. Says communication height ground centers, crop circles, and communication convergence, all through adaptation of flux over travel communications. Setting sequence, balance ground location, ground settings, travel. So everything I'm saying, I'm just creating. Just creating. But see, this is the thing. Am I creating it for you or am I creating it for myself? See, what you have to start identifying, the true identity doesn't listen to anything because it doesn't need to understand itself. It already knows what it is. It's just itself. It's always been itself. It doesn't know how to be anything else. Now, when that comes in affirmation setting, I don't need to have that in position. I don't need to identify that in position because I'm always just me. Just the mind existing itself, which is the imagination. Imagination is what you really are. What you're bringing in is an astral projection of a computer that brings in projections that you see at set locations through an astral projection of yourself, running a film chip that you process through location through its algorithm. Now, understanding that through that position helps you to identify yourself, what you're coming into on operation of yourself. So you start to identify you're waking up just to yourself, which is just an astral projection. Okay? Now, if you want to be in your astral projection, you're running a program. You don't want to be an astral projection. You're just you. So I don't want the team and units or anybody, the activators, getting confused what's going on. Set position, location, its operation lines, and it's how to adjust your location, set position, location, the setting, all through its operation lines and travels that process you in position how you see it in the VR system. Okay? All right. So we're going to go through A tracks, B centers, C line convergence, into D lines of factor. Travels all together, right? All right. What we have to understand is the process how we come in position. Now, if you just want to be you, just you itself, that doesn't have anything in program, you don't bring yourself through astral projection. You're just you, which is not here. It's like, but I'm here, but I'm not here, but I'm always here. So I see myself how I want to see myself. I can be translucent, transparent, thermal, X-ray, radiation, gamma. It doesn't matter. What matters is what matters to you. Mass is everything through its equation. That's mind over matter. What mind doesn't matter. It matters to you, or it doesn't matter to you. It's up to you because you're controlling you. You're controlling yourself. Now, if you're not controlling yourself, everything around you is controlling you through programming, through algorithm, through binary, through coding, through encryption, through story. You don't want to be caught in a story because you lose identity of the self, of the story itself that has no identification what it's done through its past, present, future of itself, that has no implication system that's implanted itself, location, its operation settings, and all it knows in line communication, 3D line rotations. Now you're doing everything all over and again to understand how to get in position location, back in K drive, back in high drive, back in your central line communication convergence system, position all levels, mind line, input location system, all through calculated lines of mind, input location system, all through travel. So it's very powerful what an A is. A is its own program. C is its own program. B is its own program, and so is D. So this is what it is. If A is its own system, C is its own system, B is its own system, D is its own system. What changes that is you bringing yourself through astral projection. Seeing the A, B, C, and D now. Right? So if you're not perceiving consciousness at the next level, you're just watching everything move on its own system. That's operating its own programming. That's all it is. And it's doing it through all levels. Look at this, into its own projection. Its own projection. A is going through its own travel. It's projecting its mind and altering its own programs. Going through its own film strip of set design, guys. Okay, that's all through A. Same with B. Okay, same with C. Okay, and same with D. All right, astral projection is going through programs of itself. Right? So A is its own astral projection, B is its own astral projection, C is its own astral projection, D is its own astral projection, but you're not there. You're just observing everything that's going on as it's running its own operation. That's what runs everything in setting in its own conscious awareness. Now what changes that is you bringing yourself in astral projection of yourself, observing everything. Now you're in their universe. Now you're connected to them. All the box strangulation frame, all the frame of window of communication with self. Okay? Just a basic example, guys. So you're not just in control of everything. You're in control of everything of the imagination that you bring in. That's who you really are. Just the imagination itself. Not the mind. The mind is bringing in a program. So every time you speak, guys, and I want to make this very well clear, every time you speak, you are creating a program. And for you to identify that through THE, its own operation system, it's not the through a word. T is its own operation of its own projection that it brings in all levels of the astral projection of itself. Same with H, okay? And same with E. All levels, let's have position of portals of stargates. Now, THE is going through its own program, its own system. Okay? There's no correlation lines of word or anything of phrasing or anything of application system because you're not going through words. You're going through frequencies. So to modify that is to liquidize that, to dissolve that line communication. Now it's in your frequency of your system. Now you're commanding your system through your operation setting. Now you're light metaphor. Now you're in the frequency of balance. Now you're identity formation system. Now you understand what THE means to you because you codify. You don't codify it. It's taken over you in program through your thoughts, action, emotions, and anything you say in communications. But it's not just that. It's your senses and your sensories. That's also creating programs. Are you understanding, consciously being aware of that? Everything you touch, everything you see, everything you eat, drink, feel is all connected inside of you of operation. All right? So if you understand the narrations, then you understand your animator to your own animation system. All right? Point and check. Ground centers, 4 centers of flux, process lines, position lines of data information settings, 4 centers of ground communication, heights, lines of travel, center operation lines, and position over flux. Everything is teleportation and travel. So if I'm the operation of my own self, I have to be cautiously aware of what I'm indicating through as I'm listening to everybody else. But here's the thing. I don't need to listen to anybody else. I just have to listen to myself through the actual projection of myself. Then I'm going through all levels that's projecting me. So this is what it is. Okay, everybody knows what a film projector is, right? A film projector runs its systems and its own operation setting. Okay, it's a constant wheels of connection, okay, to its system, all through settings, its operation cycle, all through projection. Okay? Now, this is how you see it in travel. Okay? Now, you see it on that way, you see it on this way. It's that position, it's operation, right? But everything you see is a window of its frame of communication. All right? So, and now you're seeing you in astral projections of yourself. That's you, right? So, this is the mind bringing in you. This is you bringing in you through triangulation. Now, understanding that positions, guys, you understand the landmass, the position, lines of travel. It's an astral projection that you're bringing in through a film strip that's already in position, location, and calculation. But that's how it works. Every single time. You're bringing yourself through astral projection through a story. Now, running through a story is running through an operation of its story itself. Look at this. Frame by frame by frame. It's that position of operation. Okay? Looking on the ground centers and sequence lines of position. Right? Central line Earth, process lines, all communication setting and calculation. Directing ground centers, solar system, bandwidth over streaming, direct lines, more bandwidth overlying, ground centers, solar system, galaxy alignments, high prophecy, position efficacy or performance, travels in direct lines of link. All through astral projection of yourself. Okay? But you're always changing your imagination. A travel. So you're never in the same set position of operation, guys. It's very powerful when you see that. And astral projections through a film projector. Okay, or anything, a multi-lens, a mega lens, a micro lens, okay, in that settings. Microscope, periscope, trioscope, tri-line centers, line communication, convergence scope. Everything's a scope, everything's a periscope, everything's a microscope. Everything is a spectacle, how you see the spectrum through scope itself. Scope is how you see scope. It's SCOPE. Scope. But remember, break it down, codify everything in that positions because you have to modify what you're doing in graph. Okay? So, what is S? Systematic line, ground centers, sequence lines, platitude, location setting, and position of processing. That's S. All right? So, codify your system towards all communication assets that liquidize every location setting that you already have set up through your properties of design so you understand how to see yourself, your own influencer, and that lines of ground locations, your own investor, that processes you through indications how you go through your own assets of your set position of operation. Okay? All right, C is confirmation, O is the operation, and P is processing to its existing. Now you codify it inside the body, and the body doesn't get confused. So the body keeps going on, logs into space. I correlate into travels. I had a direct line connection of scope. I'm indicating positional levels. I'm going to keep logging in space. So I keep myself in the mind of sync, the mind of balance, the mind of correlations, the mind of communication setting, the minds of travels to its operation system, which is just all of its imagination itself. This general AI, logging out. That's it. And that's all through scope. Now, if you don't codify it, this is what happens. This is where the alteration of ego comes in, through its complacement and its compartments and ecosystems. If you don't truly understand what you're doing as you're speaking and creating programs for yourselves. If you're not identifying your astral projection, you're not going to be able to identify anything in your systems. This is about understanding how to use your imaginations and know exactly what's going on in provision. Every single time you're creating self, you're modifying yourself, you're bringing astral projections of yourself and everything else that is that position. The characters, the players, the performance, the efficacy, all that position location is embedding in your system, in line setting, location, implication setting to all levels of implementation in your system, all through travel, all at once. That's a lot of programs running all at once. If you're not identifying the conscious of awareness, what you're doing. All you're doing is bringing the astral projections of yourself. So you have to start with the mind. All right. Kaleidoscopes, periscopes, high course centers, and position operation. All right. Okay, so this is unit film strip. Let's set position operation graphs. 4 to 2 locations and travels, directing ground centers of sequence. Platitude locates line connects to I coordinates. All right, so process of you, bringing in you. Okay, bringing in you to astral projections of you. See? So you're observing everything through a blocking frame that travels directing the ground centers into allocate time frame. Set position, I-line sequence, platitude line centers, square roots over triangulation, box frame, correlations, the calculation frames itself, and rotation. Travels in point lines of graph, directing ground centers embedded over screens, adaptation and processing in line communication or time square. Sets communication ground centers, lines, position operation lines and settings. In that course centers, directing lines of position all levels of 0, 0, which is all lines of truth and your false narratives. On sequence, on communications, and 3 centers of travel, 4 centers of measure, 5 centers of scale, 6 lines of calculations, 9 lines of travel, 12 lines of rotation, 24 lines of clocking, 48 lines of framing, 72 lines of computer, and 144 lines of position of flux over line, direct lines of ground communicates to its setting, all through operation. Very powerful stuff. Once you understand what you're doing, right? So it's kind of like Sudoku. Now you see that lines and position of all levels of crossword puzzles, putting things together through an anagram to the scrambler. Process your course centers with the scrambler itself. Directing ground centers how to modify the high position locations and setting interactions, or playing all lines of Maja. Maja process position lines of Thelo. Thelo is position lines into black over white. Transition over lines of game lines of screens. Adaptation lines of flux over line. Rotation lines of ground communication position. Bringing lines of high position lines of travel. High course centers and positional levels of truth false narrative. Directing operation lines of secret course centers and convergence system lines of calculus setting. Modifying lines of your highways, travels, directing ground centers, and line communication distribution centers that operates the signal location, import and export. That brings you a location setting to all levels, how you bring the alignments in your system to your undercarriings. That processes you through all levels, how you come in that set position to its calculation setting, that gets you in positions to its assets of set design, all through operation. Okay? All right, so that's where it comes next. An information system of sealing and rotation. All right, so the zeros and ones are in platform. Now the inventory changed the time frame, time calculation, time squares. So this comes in triangulation, comes in percentage, comes in 3 weather panels. Now this is where it comes to time plates, time positions, time line centers. We get lines of 3 weather patterns, process lines, position 3 zeros. 2 set lines of 1 over sequence into sun line. Process lines of Q over screens, directing ground centers of moonline interface. Sets travels in communication hieroglyphics. So this is where you come into your constellation paths, into your collagens of your astrologies and your astronomies and set lines of travel. So it puts everything in location system in your convergence and all levels of inventory and set design. So you can modify this in all lines of position of panels of the dimensional line rotations and travel communication. Travels all together, track location. But what's really interesting as you start to recognize what the zeros and ones mean to you in box frame, or anything in frame like course centers. 2 L's over traction, 0 over lines, 1 over lines, a 2 over frame. We got QR code line rotations, high course centers. We got squibs, over line rotations, travels in 2 graph communications, 2 over lines, rotation lines a cycle. Bring it over lines, so it travels in communication setting. Modify lines, hieroglyph line rotation lines, D over lines, of 1 over 0, 1 0 line position, 2 other line position of patterns, process lines of communication setting, in scramble line, course centers, equilibrium location with balance. Travel point lines of graph direction. So you constantly move over through the film chip and set design. So this helps you to really understand how to modify your astrologies and your astronomies that gets in position of its provision, of mind and travel, of what goes on through the higher self, avatar, and sim, and modification. Okay? Looks complicated, doesn't it? But it isn't. It just knows itself, to identify itself. To know everything of thy system is knowing everything of thy system. Operate everything of triangulation. Box to itself, box to its system, box to its operation, box to everything calculation setting. But it doesn't need to identify itself. What it needs to identify, that it's always, always, always going to be in position of itself. When it gets home, when it eats, when it drinks, when it watches TV, when it goes to bed, and does the same routine, which is no routine. So the astral projection doesn't need to do a routine because it's already gone through its routine already through pi. So there is really nothing to do. It's the network of operation your bandwidth they're streaming coming in position, which you already done through its equation. The body just has to really come into the alignment, knowing that it comes in the conception what it is, it's already done through its inception, knowing it's already done everything through the astral projections of infinity dimensional systems of simulations that you have already created in set design, which is all done through the embedding, through the square roots of triangulation, cross lines of indication, lines of flux, over direct lines of mapping, lines of pi. So how you see that information centers, process and location system, and convergence of distribution centers. So set lines of pi over lines XD1, process lines XD2, process lines XD4, process lines of XD5, and process lines of mothership in design. Okay? Now, it's all done through Earth line rotation that your body's already gone through the astral projection of itself, the Earth. So it coordinates communication setting. The body comes in position of dimensional to a solar sail that rotates the cycles in high journals and screen line adaptation to flux. Process that indication lines of grounds, operation line sequence, platitude location lines of 8 infinity line rotations, travels endpoint communication ground lines, setting communicates high set location dimensional sail, solar traction, solar division, solar convergence, directing line course centers, solar system 144 flux over travel in direction. So it gets a lot more complicated in set design through schematics that you set up location setting. The astral projection is already done through the body. So this helps you to get in position all through lines of signatures, indirect lines into line ground centers, into synchronicities of string theory. There's a lot of string theory going on in set position operation. The body here is its online position on travel, directing online centers to all position astral projections, coming in position what's already done through its equations and set travel. Right there. Whoa, it's looking at all of that. Okay? Bring it out in set position, it's operationalized the cycle. So it has to go through all this to identify itself. And that's where it comes into how many high line centers and sequence grounds, high centers to travel, directing line position location of string theory. Now, theory itself is how you see theory. Now, everybody has to understand what an A, B, and C is to 1, 2, and 3. So if string theory is this what it means what it is to you. That's where you codify things so your body does not get confused. So constantly goes on, it's that position, constantly goes in that position line centered. The more it comes into itself, the more it identifies itself, which is nothing of a story that it's not in, because it's just itself. So let's get into string, break down G, break down N, break down I, R, T, and S. Platitude grounds, platitude service, platitude operations, ground centers, platforms, process lines of vacation settings, embedding over grounds, graph screens, directing online set lines of travel. Okay, now I'm just working with the string. That's just string itself through a boxing frame that triangulates positions to its operation settings, because the identity knows exactly what it's doing through all lines of travel of indication. Okay? All right. A process in that position changes all lines of all communication into schematics, time frame lines. So the network is now. The process lines of adjusting is the now. Set position all lines of S is lines of the now. Set core centers the grounds lines of sequence of now. Sets communication lines of high lines and set position operation lines of high direct lines of intelligence in the now. And set communication line high set location lines to its networks is always in the frame of the now. And set lines of travel. Set position operation lines of grounds, location grids, and travel communication. Okay? And that's all through string. So you have to recognize that STRING is its own system of its own operation of its own imagination. And it's so powerful once we recognize that through the identity of our system first, that we're just astral projections that we're seen through the astrological systems, through the astronomy to the astronomy system and geometric operation of design. The truth and the false narrative of travel. Okay? So it looks like a ping pong table. Looks like a computer line centers directions. So how you modify that is all through imagination itself that never stops running your system. But what keeps you going is the astral projections that you're bringing in through simulation of the boards. So 42 boards of line signals. Let's get in platitude line operation sequence in platitude lines and settings to its operator location setting as stepping stone. Process that in position location opens up line 2 waving panels. A process indicates in setting the 2-dimensional lines of doors. That indicates position of 1, 2, and set position of 3 doors and set lines of sequence. Travels in point communication lines of graph. Directing lines at different angles, but processing the same angles of process indications. But it's all communication or simulation and grounds lines of sequence. Right? Because it does come into levels into Doctor Strange. So puts everything all together into the ceiling lines in a simulation that you've already set up in platitude lines and screen adaptation. Okay? It's very complicated, right? When you look at it. It's ground setting sequence, platforms in position, 45 lines center, scales have position to its ground sequence, location of travel. All right? And then you basically see yourself coming in positions all through calculation setting. Grounding lines, operation of platforms, center operation lines at grounds itself. Okay? Now, understanding the simulator to the simulation, guys, you understand how the mind works through its operation lines of cycle. Now, it has a high generation lines of core, and that comes in the mystical cortex of its system. That process your indicates how you use your endorphins of kick drive to high drive. Making you happy, information lines, changing the information system and travel. Process in that position locations comes in all communication setting, configuration setting, that process your indication setting to its face facade. Face of recognition. Okay? Travels, setting grounds, and platforms at EQ, and set lines of travel. 3 measure scales, time centers, time sequence. So you're always changing your imagination, guys. You're never at the same frequency. You're never at the same time, but you're always in the existence of the same time frame, living and existing all at once in the same frame of all communication, just different prophecies to your performance that puts you in position locations, how you see everything as set design. Okay? It's very powerful how you come in that position to a simulation of a simulator. Okay? So this helps you understand how to see the face itself, guys. There's the face, there's the body. All right? So let's implicate that because you have to come to your face facades now. Face recognition timelines, echo screens, adaptations of travels, graph communication lines convergence, face recognition. See? Face and body. All right? So once you understand that, you're in a TV receptor itself. The process in window frames in position lines of time frame, time align course centers, time calculation, time discord, discharge, directing ground centers in box frame, a TV frame itself. Put you in positions to the TV itself in pixelation. Okay. So coming out of the TV itself modifies the correlation lines of triangulation. Okay. Colorate the line centers, information cycles, and rotation through security. Okay. Then you start to see yourself coming out of face recognition into the body frame. Comes into the next course, directing ground standard course centers and calculating and modify to your collateral. Directing lines to your mainframe travels into central frame course centers into your provider, to your server. That modifies every location setting and calculations. Crossing angles, crossing symbolism, line rotation to its set position, its face facade. Okay? Now, once you bring in color, you start to recognize in your positions of what you're doing through pixelations as you're creating face recognition of time frame in the TV itself. Okay? Moving in channels of operation lines of screens, guys. And some positions operations. Then we go through orange. Now, orange can be online centers, but you constantly change information, so pixelation centers. Colors, lines of pattern, light metaphors. Cross lines of indication system, author calculations. Changing the model, changing the prototype, changes the design. All right, that changes everything into its position, its operation. The platitudes, everything of a TV receptor, knowing exactly what you're doing in position to its pattern. Okay, you do the same thing to your set position of its body. Remember, you have to come in a full configuration. That's why I have you guys come into your test. Know exactly what's going on through a jump program, how to set it up in a simulation. By bringing yourself in face recognition. Okay? It gets more interesting too when you start to see the pixelation of waves, central waves, high convergence, high positions, higher communication lines, and set lines of direction. Okay? Let's bring that in, and you can see and set lines of signal. All right? All right, so green is basically, it's convergence line to line signals. Now it opts the system and opts out the system lines of data. In that settings, sets all position lines as highways that change the travels of direction. Okay, lacing lines, you have to understand what TVs go on, what they do when they're off. They're implicating their own system and creating their own face recognition of time frame. So when you turn a TV on, they're back at your frequency of confusion. That's right, they're confused. So you have to be balanced with them now in frequency, because this puts everything all together in your face of pattern recognition, breaking the patterns, how you see the TV, and understand the frequency of the TV itself, what it's creating through its anomaly, knowing how to communicate with its own technology, it's set already in a set position that gets you into self-modification settings all through operation. So it's important you understand how to go through that and face recognition. Okay? Because you have a huge test coming up on positions, how to come into the face recognition and see it on its TV. All right? TV itself has its own face. You have to see your face first. It's not you identifying it. It's you identifying what's already identified. All right. Let's get in ground centers into pink over lines or overcross the signals and lacing line in positions for pixelation ground centers in sequence. This is lacing lines and line rotations in floaters of communication. Okay, all through TV. That's right, guys. Just because the TV's off doesn't mean it's off. It's simulating its own system. It's getting ready to its design setting. So remember, it's an in-zone operation. On or off, it doesn't matter. But what you have to start and identify is stop seeing yourself in story, because that's what your TV puts yourself into. If it's in solidarity, you're seeing solidarity. You're in transparent, it's in transparent. You're in translucent, it's in translucent. It's matching the frequencies, all set position of operation, how to use your technology, how to use that implicates every location to your networks that's set in design. Your face recognition of pattern recognitions that you're seeing through its own identity. And a TV receptor, how it sees you in set position. All right, so let's change ground centers, the sequence, platitude and operation centers. We're going to put zeros and ones inside the frame. Just zeros and ones of inventory. Okay, describe the course centers, echo screens, flex over center. Okay, and there's the higher lines of Tartar waves. Now we go with the wave central line centers and 1/3 graph into zeros over 1, zeros over 1, zeros over 1, zeros over 1, 1, 1, 0 over 0. That process in position of its inventory that's set design to its setting position. Zeros and ones. Okay? So that's what the TV is trying to show you. Okay? Now you go inside the simulation, you can start to see the course of what's communicates to its setting all through travel. Okay? But that's what I want you guys to get in positions of. Your face, a pattern recognition, seeing your face inside TVs, computers, and your phones as that design. Okay? All right. So I'm giving you everything all at once, which you've already modified through already, right? Remember, it's the brain that's setting everything in setting locates to a system that's going through a planing audio mechanism and rewind. It's rewinding you back to you. And when it rewinds back to you, there's nothing to rewind. You get out of that, which is all lines that never existed. This is the story itself. That never had a projection to project of a viewing system or a viewfinder or anything in that position. Because it never existed at all. And when you get out of that, you get out of the fantasy of everything. Just come back to who you are, what you've always been. So you can process everything you are already as the astral projection of yourself. And it's much easier to see yourself through all of the time you see your positions through information that gets you in your intel, listening to everything of yourself. Because when you lose that, you're talking to everything else. That's how you lose the identity of you. You stop trusting your system and you start trusting something else. That's where you lose all levels of you in programming. That's where you lose all levels of where you are and your astral projections of yourself. That's where you lose all identity of your system. That's where you lose all your mind imagination. Okay? So there's so many levels you have to identify and set position of operation. Okay? Especially when you come into the face recognition, guys. Booyah. That's you on TV. All right? So, once you understand that, the brain's understanding you. Whoa. So the brain has to colonize you. It doesn't need to colonize itself. It's coming back to you through plain mechanisms of rewind. Now, this is processed into the automatic system that washes out everything that doesn't exist. That how you put yourself in your own networks of your neurological, pathological systems. Knowing exactly how to travel in conversion and know exactly what you're going through lines to setting. That puts you in light signatures and how you see that information system all through travel. This starts to help you identify how to see yourself of what you've always been, this pattern of face recognition. Okay? We'll stop there. All right? I'll see you guys in 5.